Joining us now, Senator John Thune is a Republican from South Dakota. He also serves on the Budget Committee. Our guest host continues to be Arthur Brooks, president of the AEI, and we've been back and forth about a lot of things, Senator. And I guess what we've come to decide was that it's a political document in a political season, and that the president probably wouldn't have gotten any points anyway. If he had maybe a year ago, or when Simpson Bowles first came out, maybe that was the time. But there was no upside for him to really propose a serious document at this point.
Well, that's only if you assume that we can afford to waste a whole year, and I don't assume that. I think that we got to make headway. We got huge challenges. We know this fiscal crisis isn't going away. You've been talking this morning on the program about what's happening in Greece and Europe. We're not far behind if we don't start to address these long-term entitlement challenges, and that's where the president's budget completely fails. Not only does it not take on the spending side of the equation and what's driving federal spending, which is health care costs, but he also raises taxes massively, $1.9 trillion tax increases at a time when we've got an economy that's struggling to get back on its feet. So it's not a serious document, as you mentioned. Everybody's describing it as a political document, a campaign document, but it just can't be taken seriously by the Congress of the American people when the president punts on every major issue.
I don't know whether you saw David Stockman, but he thinks we need to close the gap. It's not going to come just through growth. He wants, tax increases everywhere. I mean, here's the thing, Senator.
28%.
There's never a good time to cut spending for the Democrats, but there's never a good time to raise taxes for Republicans. It's always the economy is always cited on both sides, so that just means the status quo continues.
Well, if you look at 2006 and 2007, when we had essentially the tax code in place that we have now, you had revenues in the 18 to 19% range. What's gotten out of control is the spending side. When we get up to 24, 25% of our GDP in terms of federal spending, that's completely out of whack with any kind of historical average. So, and frankly, I think when people talk about revenues, I'd like to see revenues the old-fashioned way, which is through economic growth. But if revenues were to be put on the table, I think it would be assumed that they would be used to pay down debt. But the fact of the matter is that this president and his allies here in Congress want to tax more so they can spend more. You know, and spending goes up by 62% in this budget. The debt goes up by $11 trillion. This is not a budget that is serious in terms of taking on spending. And I think that's what the American people want to see. And frankly, I think that people might accept a discussion about revenues if they knew that it was going to be used to pay down debt and make our future more secure.
If you're going to get reelected by the people that are benefiting from all that spending, and it's not going to be the real document anyway, why wouldn't you? This is the document I'd float out there too.
Well, look, I think that the president clearly was thinking about his reelection, and last year his budget wasn't serious either, as you know. We voted on it in the United States Senate. It got defeated by a vote of 97-0. He, in 4 budgets in a row now, has not taken seriously the challenges that face the country. And we've got to have leadership from the White House to solve big problems, and we're not getting it. This is a fantasy budget, and frankly, the leadership we're getting out of the White House right now is fantasy leadership. We're not seeing the type of leaning into the problems that face this country and taking them on. And granted, it is an election year, but you know, we don't have a year to waste. This thing, the clock is ticking. It's been described as a ticking time bomb in terms of the challenges that we face, and it's going to explode on us if we don't take some action.
Senator Arthur Brooks here from AEI. It's great to see you again.
Hey, Arthur.
I got a quick question for you on this. You know, when you said something that I completely agree with, which is the only real solution to this thing is growth. The key thing is, I mean, the devil's in the details. We got to have some specifics on growth policy. So as you're talking to the presidential candidates, which I know you are, what are the 2 or 3 specific growth planks that should be in their platform such that we can realistically talk about escaping from this mess?
Well, honestly, Arthur, I think that you can't start a discussion about economic growth without reining in federal spending. We know there's a correlation between spending and debt as a percentage of GDP and economic growth, and we're losing economic growth, and that means fewer jobs every year because we're maintaining such high levels of spending and debt. But I think also you've got to start making our business tax rates competitive. You can't have a 35% tax rate and be the highest in the industrialized world and expect that your economy is going to be competitive. That's one thing I think that all our presidential candidates need to be talking about is tax reform that broadens the base and lowers the rates and gets us more competitive in the world marketplace. Energy policy would be another thing. There are a whole range of issues that I think our candidates need to be addressing. But frankly, we have got to take on, and the president should have in his budget,
Senator,
this issue of spending and debt.
If the budget had come to the middle, if the president had come to the middle a little bit, do you think that you could have found any way to cross the aisle and sing Kumbaya together? I mean, really, in this election cycle, I ask it because I wonder just practically what the president's supposed to do at this point.
Right. Well, and I think, honestly, Andrew, if we had had a discussion about, I think there are Republicans up here, and there are many of them, you know, in the House side, Paul Ryan and others who've made some pretty bold proposals when it comes to reforming our entitlement programs. There are a lot of us up here who want to work with the president on meaningful entitlement reform, on tax reform, and on reducing spending and debt. And I think that those are all things that Republicans are anxious to work with the president on. My guess is that if he had come to the middle on some of those things, there would have been Republicans that were willing to meet him there. And frankly, honestly, with the issue of revenues, which you mentioned earlier, again, I think if the president were willing to acknowledge that the revenues need to be used to pay down debt, there might have been more of a willingness on the part of Republicans to accept that argument as well. The problem is he wants to tax more to spend more, and that's not what we need more of.
All right, Senator, thanks.